Ministers, ambassadors, esteemed colleagues, Agrini Ushla, you are all very welcome this morning to today's online webinar on climate change and energy security, advancing energy transition while ensuring energy security, the lessons learned in the Nordic Baltic countries and Ireland. My name is Noelle O'Connell and I'm the CEO of European Movement Ireland, and I have the honour to be the moderator for today's really exciting and timely webinar. So first of all, to start proceedings, I would like to open our webinar this morning with a pre-recorded message from the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, Mr. Simon Coveney TD, who will make a few introductory remarks by way of video.
It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this, the second Ireland Nordic Baltic 8 conference to be hosted here in Dublin. One of the few benefits of the pandemic is that we can be joined online by a much wider audience than attended the first conference in Ivy House in Dublin in October 2019. Earlier this month, I was at COP26 in Glasgow with my colleague Eamon Ryan, who is with you this morning. Ireland and our friends and partners in the Nordic and Baltic regions have been keenly aware for many years of the need for rigorous and effective climate action. Those of us who are EU member states are engaged in the European Green Deal, with its ambitious targets to achieve a low-carbon economy. Transitioning to renewable and low-carbon energy options is an important step towards the Green Deal goal of reaching net zero emissions. We welcome the support of Norway and Iceland for the Green Deal and look forward to working closely with them. The next 10 years will see citizens having to embrace huge changes to their lives if the needed energy transition is to be achieved. The IEA World Energy Outlook says that energy transition can pose a risk to energy security if there are mismatches between energy supply and demand, which could cause tensions in global trade. Citizens will not thank us if the lights go out or the heat goes off in a European winter. There's a great panel of expert speakers today to discuss how to make the transition to renewable energy as smooth and as just as possible. Scientists, energy companies and entrepreneurs in Ireland, the Nordics and the Baltics already have expertise in developing new technologies. The Nordic strategy launched by the Irish government earlier this year envisages cooperation in these areas, and Ireland is up for that. You will hear from industry today about their work to advance the energy transition in a sustainable way. I wish you a productive morning, and I thank the Nordic Baltic ambassadors accredited to Ireland for collaborating with my department to produce what promises to be a very interesting but hopefully challenging event as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Coveney, for those thought-provoking remarks and setting the scene, so to speak. So firstly, if I may, a word about the Ireland NB8 conference itself. This is actually the second one of these conferences, and it's the first virtual one. And the conference idea itself grew out of a shared understanding of how like-minded Ireland is with our Nordic Baltic neighbours. And the common goal of all the countries in the Nordic Baltic 8, and Ireland indeed, is to share that considerable expertise we have as countries in specific areas. We have many shared strengths and have much to learn from one another. Ireland enjoys strong partnerships with each of the Nordic Baltic 8 countries, and this relationship is nurtured by the Nordic Baltic ambassadors accredited to Ireland, who were the driving force between all of us gathering here virtually today, and I would like to pay tribute to them. A special tribute and credit and thanks in particular to Finland's ambassador to Ireland, Her Excellency Riley Lalanampi, who is the current chair of the group, for conceiving and driving forward today's event. So thank you, Riley. And while the issues of climate change and energy security receive much public and political attention, they may not always have been examined together, but as we face into a period where decisions flowing from the likes of the European Green Deal will impact on our everyday lives, that relationship between climate change and energy security is increasingly coming under focus. Energy is the key pillar that sustains and drives economic growth and prosperity, and is a priority policy area for the EU. As a result, energy security is a strategic foreign policy concern for countries including all the member states in the EU. And to help us understand and explore these very pressing topics of climate change and energy security this morning, I'm absolutely delighted to see that we are joined by a very distinguished and accomplished panel of experts right across the EU, the Nordic Baltics and Ireland, France, Finland, Lithuania, and Cork and Dublin as well. So we've a fantastic mix of speakers. And in a change to the lineup, and in a change, as Minister Coveney outlined, Minister Eamon Ryan sends his apologies. He was detained at short notice due to government business, but I'm delighted that we have in his stead Minister for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne, TD, who is going to outline and provide an overview of the Irish government position on these policies. Following then Minister Byrne's address, and thank you very much, Minister, for stepping in at short notice, we will be followed then by Kevin O'Donovan, a Managing Director of Statkraft. He will be preceded by the Managing Director of Finnish Energy, Jukka Leskela, and then we'll be followed by Albinas Sanaviches, the Vice Minister for Energy for the Republic of Lithuania. And our final speaker then will be Dr. Stephanie Buchert, who is the Head of Demand Sectors Unit at the International Energy Agency in Paris. So a very warm welcome to all our distinguished panel. And following remarks from our speakers today, who I will introduce in turn, we will then open the floor to questions from those of you joining us today. So on the live stream, you should see the Slido app live, and you can send in your questions and comments to that. And I will pose them then to all of the speakers when they have completed their opening interventions. So for those of you active on the Twitter machine, if you are commenting and engaging on this morning's event on Twitter, and we really hope you are, we want to get that conversation going, please use the hashtag N8IRE for energy security and the handles at DFATIRL. So thank you very much for that housekeeping introductory remarks. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our Minister for European Affairs, Minister Thomas Byrne. A very warm welcome to you, Minister. I know how busy you are. We're delighted to have you with us. And it is my pleasure to hand you the virtual floor. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks very much, Noel. And I'm sorry that the star attraction is not here today, Eamon Ryan, but that's the way these things are today. I'd like to thank everybody for taking part today. Albinas from Lithuania was my former counterpart in the General Affairs Council. It's great to see you here today. I'm pretty sure I've come across you, Kevin O'Donovan, as well, in my role as a member of the Dáil. I could be wrong on that, but I'm almost certain that I have. So thank you, and thank all of the other panelists as well. Without further ado, I mean, look, can I just say as well, sorry, that's very important as well in terms of to give the context of excellent cooperation and good relations between Ireland and the Nordic Baltic region on a range of fronts. And in fact, this is the second webinar / seminar that I've addressed on the issue of electricity supply or energy supply and climate change as well in the last 2 weeks, involving Nordic Baltic, we might call them, audiences. So I think this is very, very important, and it's a very important strategic effort by the Irish government in cooperation, of course, with our partners. And once again, to thank all the ambassadors from the region, and in particular, we very much welcome the fact that Sweden will be reopening your embassy as well in Dublin next year, and that's very, very welcome, and we're grateful for that, because there is fantastic cooperation at all levels between our countries. The scientific evidence demonstrates that the atmosphere is warming, of course. We don't have to debate that anymore, thank God. That relatively recently that was questioned, but of course the climate is changing, we know, with each passing year. The changes are causing extensive direct and indirect harm to Ireland and its people, as well as to other countries more exposed and less able than we are to withstand the associated impacts. So as we know, the European Union has committed itself to reduce its emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Ireland welcomes and supports that increased EU ambition, of course. It's consistent with our national approach, as the government commits to halving our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and reaching net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. The targets now are not just targets, they've been given legal force by our Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Acts from 2015 to 2021, signed into law last July of 2021. The acts ensure that the necessary structures and processes are embedded on a legal basis so that Ireland achieves its national, EU and international climate goals and obligations in the near and long term. The new statutory framework ensures delivery of successive climate action plans, national long-term climate action strategies and national adaptation frameworks, supported by a system of carbon budgeting and sectoral targets with appropriate oversight by government, our Parliament, the Oireachtas, and a National Climate Change Advisory Council. Then in November 2021, the Irish Government launched the Climate Action Plan, which details the additional policies and measures in every sector to bring about the significant changes needed to transform our society and achieve our targets. We will support the changes through major public investment announced recently in the National Development Plan, which is a cost of 165 billion, including increased funding for retrofitting our homes, building new public transport, reskilling workers and supporting that just transition. In addition, our National Resilience and Recovery Plan commits €518 million to prioritising advancing the green transition to significantly reform and direct relevant funding towards decarbonising projects such as retrofitting, ecosystems resilience and regeneration, climate mitigation and adaptation, and green data systems. The transition to a carbon neutral economy provides huge opportunities to foster innovation, create new jobs, and grow business in areas like offshore wind, cutting-edge sustainable agriculture, which we have many examples of in Ireland, and low-carbon construction, crucially, as we develop plans to build record numbers of housing. In the electricity sector, we've reduced emissions by 1.4 million tonnes between 2011 and 2018. We aim to deliver a further reduction of 6 to 8 million tonnes by 2030. To achieve this target, the Climate Action Plan defines our targets for renewable generation. The targets include increasing the share of electricity demand generated from renewable up to 80%, where it's achievable and cost effective and doesn't compromise our security of supply. 500 megawatts of these renewables will be delivered through local community-based projects. It's really, really important to have community support for all these projects. We need to complete the phase out of coal and peat-fired electricity generation. And we need to ensure that 20 to 30% of demand is flexible by 2030. Ireland has set an ambitious target of up to 80% of electricity consumption to come from renewable sources by 2030 on that pathway to net zero emissions. During this transition to a high penetration of renewable electricity, security of supply, of course, has to be maintained. This is vital, not just for the economy and society, but for consumers and businesses to have confidence in switching to electrified solutions, such as electric vehicles and heat pumps. EirGrid, our TSO, our transmission system operator, has identified the need for about 2,000 megawatts of additional conventional generation capacity over the coming decade, with the majority of this generation needed by mid-decade. The National Development Plan and the Climate Action Plan confirmed government policy support for the need to develop this generation. The new generation, the majority of which is to be fueled by natural gas, is needed to ensure security of supply and underpin Ireland's increased target of up to 80% of electricity demand to come from renewable by 2030. The sources of renewable are variable, of course, and therefore will require other technologies to support their operation and to provide electricity supplies when they're not generating. This will require a combination of conventional generation, typically natural gas, interconnection to other jurisdictions, demand flexibility in other technologies such as energy storage, for example, batteries, and generation, of course, come from renewable gases, that is biomethane and or hydrogen that might be produced from renewable sources. Beyond 2030, it's expected that the proportion of dispatchable generation using low and zero carbon fuel sources will increase in order to achieve net zero. It's vital for Ireland to ensure that we have adequate levels of conventional generation and storage, in addition to the growth of renewables such as wind and solar. The additional generation will meet growing demand, but also replace much of the older, high-emitting conventional generation, which is powered by peat, coal, and heavy fuel oil, and that's all expected to close over the coming years. As more wind, solar, storage, and interconnection is added to the system, conventional generation is expected to operate less. The conventional generation would spend much of its time in reserve for when needed, for example, to balance the system in times of high demand and low wind or solar generation. The government has also approved and published a new policy statement on electricity security of supply, which sets out that the development of a new conventional generation is a national priority and should be permitted and supported to ensure security of supply and support the growth of renewable generation. The policy statement on security of energy supply, electricity supply, sets out a number of updates to national policy in the context of our programme for government commitments relevant to the electricity sector to planners and developers. The policy statement sets out that it is necessary and appropriate for existing conventional electricity generation capacity, including coal, fuel oil and biomass, to be retained until a new conventional electricity generation capacity is developed in order to ensure security of supply. Of course, replacing coal, oil and peat with natural gas does mean that our electricity generation will become dependent on natural gas as a backup and support to wind and solar. As a result, the Department is carrying out a review of the security of energy supply of Ireland's electricity and natural gas system. This review is being carried out for the period up to 2030 in the context of net zero emissions by 2050. A technical analysis is currently underway, which will be published to help inform a public consultation. The review will consider a range of options to ensure continued security of electricity and gas supply. These options will be considered, of course, in the context of programme for government commitments. I expect the review to complete mid-next year, and the findings then are brought to government. As I said, we've set ambitious climate targets in the last 2 years, and we've been putting in place the necessary tools to meet these objectives. Ireland welcomes and supports the increased EU ambition. It's consistent with our national approach, as the government commits to halving our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050 at the latest. The Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Acts established a legally binding framework with clear targets and commitments. The Act ensures that the necessary structures and processes are embedded on a legal basis, so that Ireland achieves its national, EU and international climate goals in the near and long terms. The Climate Action Plan sets out the policies and measures necessary to achieve our commitments of delivering a 51% reduction in Ireland's overall greenhouse gas emissions from 21 to 30. In relation to electricity, the plan includes these targets. We want to increase the share of electricity demand generated from renewable sources up to 80% without compromising security. 500 megawatts of renewable, as I said, through local community-based projects. We want to end the coal and peat-fired generation, and want to ensure that demand is flexible. 30% of that demand is flexible by 2030. We must ensure that we have adequate levels of conventional generation and storage, in addition to the growth of renewables. The additional generation will meet growing demand, but also place much of the older, high-emitting conventional generation that will replace all that, and that's peat, coal, and fuel oil, and that will happen. They will close over the coming years. Gurab Mahabat, Noel, and thank you to everybody on this panel, and once again, may I apologise for the absence of Minister Eamon Ryan.
Many thanks, Minister Byrne. Fantastic to get that really comprehensive and ambitious overview of the Irish government's roadmap and policy on these really important areas. And we're very grateful for you stepping in at such short notice. And I know you have a busy agenda ahead of you heading to Brussels. So may I wish you every success. And if I'm allowed to say it, in case I don't see you, very happy Christmas as well. Thank you very much, Minister Byrne. So we're delighted to have had the Minister set the scene, so to speak, in terms of the Irish perspective. And now from Ireland, we now turn to Finland. And delighted to have our next speaker with us, Mr. Jukka Leskela, who is the Managing Director at Finnish Energy, which represents approximately 260 companies that produce, acquire, transmit, and sell electricity, gas, district heat, and district cooling. Jukka's specialities are in energy, climate change, and environmental policy issues in both the EU and, of course, in his home country of Finland. And prior to taking up his role in Finnish Energy, He worked for 9 years at the energy company Fortum and has held various positions in national and European organizations, where he is presently a board member of Eurelectric, the Association of the Electricity Industry in Europe, and a board member of Nord Energy, a joint collaboration of Nordic energy associations. So pardon the pun, Jukka, but a very warm welcome to you. Delighted you are joining us, I think, today from Helsinki, and I invite you to present your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noel. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all. And I try to give an overview on what's happening in. Now I try to show my view just a moment. I hope you can see my slides at the moment. Can you?
Yes, perfect.
Can you come? Oh, thank you very much. So I will give a short overview from the Finnish experience and Finnish overview on this topic of having a carbon neutral, reliable energy system. First of all, a few words about Finland and energy. We are a very energy intensive country. We have about the population of about 5.5 million. But if you compare how much we use energy per capita per year, it's about the double as the European or Irish average, and even bigger difference in electricity consumption. So we are energy and electricity intensive country. Why is that? We have a lot of process industry in our country, in pulp and paper, in chemicals, refineries, steel, and so on. And traditionally, we don't have any of our own fossil energy resources, so we have got our welfare by using our natural resources, forests, different metals, and so on to produce products, and we have imported energy and sold the goods. That's how our society has got its welfare since a very long time. And while we have been a very poor country in fossil energy resources, we have always tried to develop our own energy resources. And this is, of course, very beneficial also from the climate change perspective. This just shows you that industry uses almost half of our energy in Finland, which is in much more than in most other countries. So also the energy need to be very competitive in order to have the competitiveness of the Finnish industries to develop their products. My message more or less is that we are very much committed in the decarbonization agenda in Finnish energy and Finnish energy companies. We support our government's target of having a carbon neutral economy by 2035 here in Finland. And Finland has succeeded very well in increasing renewables. Here is the European Union statistics on the end use of energy. We have about 43% of energy coming from renewable resources, and we have exceeded our 2020 targets already in 2019 by 20% units. That's the main reason for this is that we haven't done this only with electricity. We have increased renewable energy also very much in industrial energy, in heating, and in transport. So that explains the situation, because the end use of electricity is only 1/3 of the total energy. But when we go to the electricity generation, the fossil fuels play nowadays only a marginal role, and by 2030, 95% or much more of the electricity produced in Finland will be carbon neutral, and we will increase still some nuclear and a lot of wind by that. Already now our CO2 emissions from electricity generation are about 1/3 or 1/4 of the EU average. The carbon neutral resources cover 85%. Finland has traditionally have a very strong trust on nuclear energy, and there are companies still investing in that. And we also use a lot of our own biomass resources, but that is based on circular economy, so that we use the residues from the forest industry and forest management. We use these residues for energy in very largely in Finnish energy system. We have already decreased the emissions of electricity and heat production in Finland to less than half during the last decade. And during this decade, we will reduce about 80% of those emissions. And then at that time, they are so marginal that the Finnish target of having the carbon neutral economy is not dependent on the energy generation anymore. So I could say that energy generation we have done. That is already more than half done, and it's all in companies' business plans and investments, and there is no question that that will happen. The big question from this on is how to decarbonize transport and industry, the industrial energy use, and that will, of course, require a lot of new investments, both in the energy system, but also in the processes, in the industrial processes, and of course we need to have new coal fleet and so on. But this is possible. There are roadmaps for this already. Challenging investments certainly ahead, but also a lot of new business. And the key word is electrification. The electrification will be either direct or will happen through hydrogen. And we certainly need also clean gases to finalize the decarbonization. Coming back to the actual theme of this webinar or conference is that we need to have a reliable carbon neutral energy system. And this is actually what is the difficult part in this one. It is not to decarbonize the generation. It may not be that difficult to decarbonize transport and industry, but it's very difficult to run the energy system with the decarbonized way. We know a lot of elements that we need to have. Our experience is that we need to have diversity in energy mix. If we go only for wind and gas, it will be quite difficult. But if we also have hydro, bio, and in Finnish case, nuclear, it will be much easier. And we cannot do this alone, or if we do, it's very expensive. So the more we have the markets, the better. We need to have to extend the power grids to open the markets, and we need to invest in grids in all voltage levels. We also need to make this energy system integration so that there will be the interaction between the gas markets and the electricity markets and the heating systems. In Finnish case, we can use our huge district heating systems to stabilize the clean energy electricity production, and that can be used. The gas networks can be used for that as well. That is highly important. So we need also the hydrogen economy to support this. This was more or less my message. Yes, we can do that. We can decarbonize. That requires a lot of investments. The investments will happen if the permitting is okay. We don't need that much of subsidies. We already have the emissions trading system giving us the price signal for carbon dioxide emissions. Now we need to open the country for investments for the companies, and we can make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jukka, for those excellent remarks, and fantastic to get that Finnish perspective, which of course Finland being to the fore and leading in so much of this area in terms of innovation. So thank you very much for your excellent remarks, and as a moderator for keeping fantastically to time. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, very grateful. And we now turn from Finland to Cork, ladies and gentlemen. Our next speaker in this morning's webinar is Kevin O'Donovan, and Kevin is the Managing Director of Statkraft Ireland. headquartered in Cork, and as part of Statkraft's European wind and solar business area, Kevin is responsible for the company's renewable energy projects in Ireland. With a headquarters in Oslo, Statkraft is a global company in energy market operations with over 4,600 employees in 18 countries. And in terms of the Irish market, it is a major player here, having secured the largest capacity of any renewable energy developer in the government's 2020 renewable auction. So Kevin has a very distinguished career of working with Southwestern Services and the Element Power Group, and is now the Managing Director of Ireland for Statkraft. So Kevin, delighted to hand over to you, and you have the virtual floor. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Noelle, and thank you for inviting us to speak at the session today. Interestingly, in addition to my role of being in charge of Statkraft's renewable energy activities in Ireland, I am also heading up and have responsibility for the Statkraft's wind and solar activities across the Nordic region. So I very much am seeing firsthand the commitment across all the Nordic states to address climate change and the energy transition that is key to achieving our targets. In terms of Statkraft, as you say, it's a global player in renewable energy. It's actually the largest producer of renewable energy in Europe at the moment, and is very much at the forefront from a Norwegian perspective, where it's 100% state-owned, but also across the Nordic region and markets like Ireland and the UK. Our aim over the next decade is to build Statkraft in Ireland and to continue to be one of the top renewable players in throughout Europe. At the moment, in Ireland, we are at the forefront of developing a large range of renewable technologies and various changes that are required to help us make that energy transition. In terms of achieving this energy transition, Jukka touched on it earlier. It's not just developing wind and solar projects. It's a whole range of different technologies, and we're very much focused on that aspect of being a market integrator to enable that transition to a zero carbon system. So it's not just onshore wind and solar and offshore, but also developing new technologies. For example, Statkraft have developed the first two commercial scale battery projects in Ireland to help support the grid system with the large amount of intermittent renewables that's coming onto the system, as well as looking at new technology, hydrogen, and the transition of our transport sector to electric vehicles. The current situation for Statkraft in Ireland is we're already building 4 wind and solar projects, which are the equivalent of about 3% of the overall programme for government target for 2030. So really substantial work underway, and Statkraft is investing hundreds of millions of euros into the Irish market as we speak, and also very heavily involved in developing one of the first expected offshore projects off the east coast of Ireland, the Nisa wind farm north of Dublin, as well as having a very big pipeline of other wind, solar and battery and grid technology projects under development. I guess when we look at the theme of the conference today and the climate change and our energy transition, the question is asked, is Ireland on track to deliver on our clean energy targets? And I look at it in 2 ways. One, I see a lot of positives. We have a fantastic set of renewable resources. We have very strong and good policy in place, as Minister Byrne outlined in great detail in his presentation earlier. And there's a global movement to address the climate crisis. And I note the EPA survey that was released last week, which showed that their analysis showed that 98% of Irish people were accepting of climate change, which, as Minister Byrne, wasn't something that was a given 5 to 10 years ago. and 85% of the Irish public are seen to see it's worrying them personally. So there's a real understanding now, I think, that there has to be a step change in how we go forward. And the developers of the technologies required to help us achieve that are very much there, as well as the policy being in place. And there's a lot of good work and innovative solutions. I mentioned earlier the battery projects that Statkraft are developing in Ireland, but there's a whole range of other technical solutions that have to be delivered in addition to delivering on wind and solar power. And that is happening in Ireland at the moment. So a lot of positives. But there are challenges too. What we're trying to do here is to make a massive step change from the approach we took to energy in Ireland in the past. So some of the challenges we see are actually the more nitty-gritty pieces, because the big picture is there. As I said, the support is there from a government and public perspective. So it's more the issues around our planning process timelines, upgrading our grid network, and a big area that we see is resourcing on the state side. So we're now asking our Department of Climate Change, our system operator, our planning authorities and the regulator to make this huge transition that's required, and they are going to need the resources to be able to deliver on that. So I just wanted to kind of give an example of the, I guess what you call the nitty-gritty challenges that are there, and this is the stuff that we actually really have to focus on now to enable us to meet our targets. So one is the planning timelines. It's a major impediment in Ireland to achieving our targets, because renewable energy projects and electricity infrastructure projects, as well as any other climate action related projects, are taking too long to go through the Irish permitting process. And what we strongly recommend is that Bord Pleanála need a more delivery orientated focus on this, and ensure that they have a more fixed timeline on how long it takes to make decisions, and that they get sufficient resources with the sufficient expertise to be able to make informed decisions for the various climate action infrastructure projects that need to be delivered. Another area that we see quite a challenge on is the almost conflicting approaches between some parts of the Irish electricity system. So EirGrid, who have done a fantastic job in terms of improving the system to date to allow over 40% of our electricity demand in 2020 to come from wind, mainly onshore wind and other renewables. But now they need to relook at their plans for their target to achieve the government's target of 80% of our electricity coming from renewables by 2030. And my graph here, which is a complicated graph to try and present in the short time we're presenting for this session, I would just highlight that we need a step change there in terms of the ambition for delivery of onshore renewables over the next part of this decade to enable the system to be able to meet its targets. And that actually requires far more development of our grid system and an upgrade of our overhead power lines and our substations to accommodate that. So overall, I think we're in a really good position from an Irish perspective and across the entire Nordic region to make this energy transition. But from an Irish perspective, I see it laid in three areas. It's with the state, it's with the developers, and it's with the public. And I think that there's a very good understanding on all three sides now of what is needed at that macro level. And it's now a case of getting into the detail and addressing the issues I've said there to enable us to really make this fantastic progress forward in using our own natural resources to supply our energy needs. So I'm going to leave it at that, Noelle, and hand it back over to you, and hope I haven't run too much over time.
No, you're about 30 seconds within target and schedule, Kevin. So you're getting the gold star for me at the moment. So well done. No, thank you very much, Kevin. That was fantastic to get that overview. And I really outlined how you laid out the different challenges and opportunities that are there for the different key components and players. So I think a really useful and comprehensive overview of what's in store and that Irish perspective and that Statkraft. So thank you very much for that, Kevin. And delighted now we're going a bit further afield than Cork at the moment, and I'm really pleased that virtually, at least on this occasion, we are being joined by the Vice Minister for Energy of the Republic of Lithuania, Mr. Albinas Sanavičius, who has been the Vice Minister for Energy of Lithuania since December 2020. And I had the pleasure of meeting the Vice Minister in person in Vilnius when he was in a previous role. So it's lovely to see him again virtually. And Albinas has held postings in the Lithuanian Embassy in Finland, in Geneva as the permanent representative, and later as ambassador to the World Trade Organization, the United Nations Office, and other international organizations. He also has served as ambassador at large at the Perm Rep of Lithuania to the EU. And prior to his current role, he was Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs with responsibility for EU affairs, international trade, and OECD. Vice Minister Albinas, a very good morning to you, and I am delighted to hand the virtual floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel, and good morning. And I'm really delighted to join this panel. And I'm extremely pleased that while talking about green energy transition, we also speak about energy security. I think this is extremely important. I think it is important to keep our lights on, and if we manage to have a stable flow of energy at a competitive prices, I think our general population will also be more supportive towards green endeavors that we are undertaking right now. I guess Lithuania has a unique position in this forum because probably we are one of the countries in the world that has undertaken the largest transition so far. We had really quite a roller coaster ride. I will start with a quite recent history. In 2009, we have closed our only nuclear power plant, which was supplying more than 80% of our electricity. So overnight, we have become, net energy importer. At the same time, we had no interconnectors with our neighboring countries. We had the only supplier of natural gas, that was Gazprom, and it didn't took long before Gazprom started really abusing their monopoly power, and at some moment Lithuania has paid on average like 20-30% higher prices than other European countries for natural gas alone. Then in this difficult situation, I think we did a miracle. In 5 years' time from that very difficult beginning, we built interconnections, electricity interconnections with Sweden and Poland. That came with a huge help of European Union. And in the gas field, we built FSRU facility in Klaipėda, achieving basically two objectives. We put an effective ceiling on prices for the whole region, including to a certain extent Finland, not only Latvia and Lithuania, but also we have become natural gas independent. At that time, many people thought that we are crazy and we are doing quite stupid thing because it is impossible to compete with Gazprom gas. Current situation shows that we were right. We import more than 2/3 of our natural gas needs through LNG terminal. And with green transition of Poland and with completion of interconnection with Poland, I guess our FSRU facility will be running at full capacity in a few years' time. Coming back to electricity, situation there is complicated by yet another factor because Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, are still part of Russian electricity grid, meaning that our frequency and grid management is done by Moscow. Of course, this situation is not sustainable, and therefore we have drawn a very strict plan to disconnect and reconnect to Western European grid at the end of 2025. So our energy security ambition is also complicated by the fact that we need to do everything green. We can no longer easily develop, conventional electricity generation. And our policy choice was very clear. We have never disputed climate change ambition. In fact, we are doing much better than the EU average. But we thought that it is extremely necessary to invest into infrastructure. That is one thing. Another thing is that we have to liberalize the market so that we do all the investment solution in sustainable manner. And the third way of policy was, of course, that we have to increase our domestic generation, and mostly through renewables. That's quite natural. And we are doing quite well right now. I mean, what Jukka showed on his slide about the share of electricity produced from renewables, I guess Lithuania in that chart, if the information was the latest, would be much higher, because we had a simply explosion of onshore wind deployment. We are working also on several solar projects, and there we are enlarging the category of so-called prosumers, meaning that today Lithuania has roughly 10,000 prosumers, so this figure will be increased 3 times. At the end of 2025, we should have 30,000 prosumers using mostly photovoltaic generation, and also with some storage capacity included. We will be installing 200 megawatts of batteries on our electricity grid next year, and this is like 5 times more than in Ireland. That is again basically provoked by our energy security situation, because we have to have this capacity in order to keep our grid stable. We will be launching offshore wind generation. In the first tender will be in 2023, more or less together with Finland. The first wind park will be 700 megawatts, but already the second one is in the pipeline. And this is, you know, something that our grid still can accommodate with current technologies that are foreseen today. So after 2031, once those wind parks at sea are operational, we will have to find new ways of balancing the grid. And here, of course, our primary focus would be hydrogen. Although at the moment we see that development of technologies is a bit disappointing, we still have some time to go. We still can wait. But if hydrogen technologies are not developed in 3 to 5 years' time, then we will have to make some decisions about conventional generation. And there, I think 2 obvious candidates. One is natural gas, another one could be small nuclear reactors. As a country in the Nordic Baltic region, we are blessed by the abundance of biomass resources, and that also helped us to decarbonize our central heating system, which is already 70% carbon-free. And our ambition is to reach a level of 90% of decarbonization of our district heating system. I think that's more or less that about Lithuania's energy transition, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Thank you, Albinas, for that fascinating overview of the innovation and the resilience and the determination of Lithuania. Fascinating to get that background and overview. So thank you very much. Really enriches the conversation and the subject matter that we are discussing today. So I'm delighted now to turn to our last speaker, but by no means least. So we're going from, I think, Vilnius to Paris, and we're delighted today to be joined by Dr. Stephanie Buchart, who is Head of Demand at the International Energy Agency. She heads up the Demand Sectors Unit, and Stephanie is also the principal co-author of the agency's report, Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector, published earlier this year in May 2021. And between 2018 and 21, as a senior energy analyst, Stephanie was responsible for coordinating the analysis and modelling of the end-use sectors such as industry, transport, households and trade for the agency's flagship World Energy Outlook. And Stephanie has also contributed to various analyses and reports related to energy demand, energy efficiency and climate. Stephanie, a very good morning to you. I'm delighted you're able to join us today, and I hand over the virtual floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noelle, and thank you very much for inviting me to this great event. I'm delighted to be here. I hope you can see my screens and the slides, as I would like to share with you some global pictures about the energy and climate landscape. So first of all, we have seen over the last 2 decades that global CO2 emissions were rising continuously, and cumulative emissions since the pre-industrial era have warmed the Earth by more than 1 degree, reaching around 40 gigatons of CO2 in 2020. But clearly now we see a very different picture emerging in the energy sector, thanks to new policies, technology cost reductions, but also to the economic impact of the pandemic. In the case of the steps scenarios that we have in the World Energy Outlook, so this scenario takes into account the current policy environment, but also new policies that have been announced as long as are backed up by specific measures. In that case, in that scenario, we see a near-term peak in global emissions and after that a slow decline. So clearly a different picture compared to our baseline before the Paris Summit. Before the COP in Glasgow, countries accounting for up to 70% of global emissions have announced net zero targets, and around 120 countries have submitted new or updated 2030 NDCs. And these account for slightly more than half of global emissions. These new policy ambitions and net zero pledges have been incorporated into the new scenario that we have put into the World Energy Outlook, so the announced pledge scenario. And if all these pledges are met in full and on time, this would lead for the first time to a substantial change in the emissions pathway, as you can see, with a peak in the mid-2020s and then a steady decline. And good news, since the publication of the World Energy Outlook, more countries have been raising their ambitions, and our updated analysis of these new targets at COP26, including the India's target to reach net zero emissions by 2070, shows that if all these pledges are met in full and on time, they will be enough to hold the rise in global temperature to 1.8 degrees by the end of the century. Of course, this is a landmark moment, but this being said, we're not there yet. As you can see, we are not on the green line, and we need to feed still this green wedge. And ambition and implementation of policies also need to be raised considerably to reach a 1.5 degrees trajectory, in particular in the short term, so clearly for the next decades, where the near-term actions that countries will take will keep the 1.5 degrees door open or not. And it's all very well having an ambitious long-term target. So we have seen that a lot of countries have set up net zero targets, but if those ambitions are not backed up by specific commitments and clear actions in every single sector of the energy system within this decade, then we won't move forward. And clearly this has been highlighted by the previous speaker, Mr. Albinius, that also the research and deployment of such technologies like hydrogen needs also to happen in the next decade to make sure that those are ready by 2030 to keep the world on a net zero pathway. But this is not only also a matter of targets or ambitions of each country on its own, but it's also a matter of international collaboration. And this is another feature of the Glasgow Climate Summit, that there were some encouraging signs over there, notably the Global Maiden Pledge, but also the International Just Energy Transition Partnership with South Africa, and also the US and China joint declaration that were made at Glasgow. And all this kind of partnership will be required not to delay the transition, and also to make sure that the transition doesn't become more expensive if we delay actions. And what could be the implications in terms of energy markets? So before looking at the next decades and focusing on what is happening now on today's energy markets, we have seen and closely monitored the considerable price turbulence in the recent month, causing hardships for households and businesses. And this is due really to different factors. It's not possible to isolate one single cause of these turbulences, and it's certainly inaccurate to lay the responsibility for today's market turbulence on clean energy transitions. So among the several factors that we have analyzed, we have, of course, witnessing a sharper than expected economic rebound after the pandemic, putting pressure on supply chains. Another one is related also to weather conditions, with the extreme drought bringing down hydropower outputs, notably in Brazil, China, India, and the United States. We have also, in the case of Europe, seen that we had lower than average wind generation, and supply of some fuels were also affected by planned and unplanned outages. So among others factors that have impacted global energy market. So we are not facing a phenomenon today that is related to climate policies, but of course that doesn't mean that the transitions will be risk-free. So what does the transition tells us for the next decade? So if the impacts of technology shifts, so moving, for example, from an IC car to an electric car, efficiency improvements to make sure that our buildings consume less energy, and other measures, if we take them separately, they may look small in terms of impact on carbon emissions, but looking at the global picture, the next decade could already observe an important shift for the global energy markets, as you can see on this figure, for our three different scenarios. So the STEP scenario, taking into account the current policy environment, the APS scenario, which takes into account all the net zero pledges and the stringent NDCs that have been put on the table before the Glasgow conference, and the net zero scenario, which achieves net zero emissions by 2050 for the energy sector on its own. And already in the case of the APS, we see quite some changes. We see a peak for all fossil fuels in the next decade. And in the case of solar PV and wind, their further expansions means that they will meet all the electricity demand growth by 2030 at the global level, with annual capacity additions reaching almost 500 gigawatts by 2030. But as you can see, this remains still far from what we would observe under net zero pathway, and already by 2030, so already in the next decade. As the other panelists said, we not only need an important expansion of renewables in the case of the power system, but we need to scale up ambitions, deployment, development of clean technologies, and an acceleration of other technologies that are still at the research phase, such as hydrogen use, or also carbon capture and storage. If we look at the impacts on global energy market, a faster electrification of transport will have important impacts on oil demand. A faster decarbonization of the power sector will see coal further declining and gas declining in the second half of the decade. And meeting the additional demand from further electrification in the building sector, in the transport sector, but also in the industry sector, and the reduction of fossil fuel power generation would require a quadrupling of solar PV and wind in the next decade. But question is also, of course, how do we get there? So it was also mentioned by other panelists that we need to scale up the investments to reach to achieve this clean energy transition. And I'd like to highlight two risks that clearly must be on the radar screen of policymakers. So for many years now, the IEA has warned of a potential mismatch between investment in oil and gas supply and investment in clean energy technologies. So we face clearly a looming risk of renewed market turbulences ahead, because the world is not investing enough in energy, and we are certainly not spending enough on energy transitions. So if you look at the left-hand side figure, in practice, spending on oil and gas production since 2020 is broadly aligned with the near-term amounts that are projected in a net zero pathway in which there are no new fields approved after 2021, given the level of fossil fuel demand that we will have in such a scenario. But the transition-related investments falls far short of what we need to meet rising demand for energy services in a sustainable way. So if you look at the right-hand side figure, when we consider clean energy technologies and infrastructure, today the world is spending around 1 trillion each year in these areas, but this will need to more than triple in the coming years. The way out of this impasse is very clear. We need a huge surge in spending on energy transition, but clearly, as things stand at the global level, once again, there is a significant risk of renewed price swings and volatility, which will have an impact on all the markets. Another key area that I would like to highlight is the new energy security risk. So since our founding, the IEA has kept a sharp focus on energy security concerns, and clearly at the beginning we were focusing on the traditional ones and then expanding our work on electricity issues to include a major focus on the integration of renewables. But among the new issues that we have on our horizon, we need to be very careful about the issue of critical mineral supply, which are integral to a range of clean energy technologies, as the level of geographical concentration of production and processing of this mineral is high, really high. It's even higher than in the case of oil and gas. So if we don't pay close attention, vulnerabilities related to critical minerals could make global progress towards a clean energy future slower or even more costly. And this will, of course, hamper international efforts to tackle climate change. So these are outcomes that the world can ill afford, and we need to make sure that we keep those two in mind when we think about the clean energy transition, to make sure that we don't have future energy security risk. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to the questions and the discussion.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that excellent presentation and comprehension. Nothing like some graphs that very clearly outline the challenges, opportunities, and the current state of play. And I was particularly struck by the green wedge and that ambition gap post-Glasgow. So thank you very much for that, Stephanie. And I'm delighted to say, ladies and gentlemen, we have tons of questions coming in for our distinguished panel. So I'm putting them on tea and coffee notice that hopefully they're well prepped and well armed to go with our fantastic questions coming in on the Slido app. And I would encourage you, our audience, if you haven't already, log on to the app and maybe you could help me in my job and mark and indicate your preference, because I think we have too many questions for the time we have in, but we'll do our best with our panel. I'm sure they're up to the task. So before going to some of the questions on Slido, if I may just turn firstly to give a response to the excellent presentations we have heard this morning from our distinguished panel. I'm delighted that we are joined by Ms. Elizabeth Press, and Elizabeth is Director of Planning and Programme Support at the International Renewable Energy Agency. So Elizabeth is going to make a short first comment from the audience to kickstart the discussion, so to speak. And in her role with IRENA, Elizabeth leads the agency's programme strategy development and related activities in IRENA governing bodies. And she also has responsibility for the geopolitics of energy transitions and oversees diversification of the agency's resource base, and she is the focal point for IRENA in Europe. So Elizabeth, a very good morning to you. I'm delighted you're able to join us, and I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts on the panel's presentations and anything you may have to add yourself. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Noel, and thank you, everybody. It was really fascinating to hear these views from diverse angles. And coming from a global angle to this discussion, it's always refreshing and encouraging to speak to European audiences and to hear from Europeans, because there really is a move towards green energy and the energy transition in a way that you don't see that progressively in other parts of the world. So it's really impressive to see the progress made. I want to make a couple of comments just to pick up on some threads that came through. I think one of the important things that we always observe is that we are not talking about energy transition that is a fuel replacement. We're really looking at a new system, and somehow there is another mismatch to continue with Stephanie's focus on mismatch in the mindset, where we are trying to repeat what we have been doing for a century for something that is actually no longer applicable. And it's really important to have this holistic approach to energy transition that goes beyond traditional boundaries. There was a little bit of a discussion around the just transition in the beginning, but the entire angle of how the energy transition will impact the economy as a whole, and how is it going to impact the citizens, the people who need to carry this, because and provide a political space for this. On our side, we track jobs, and we see that renewable energy creates a lot of jobs, 3 times more than fossil fuels. And so even in the 2020, when there was really a slowdown with the pandemic, we saw 500,000 jobs in renewable energy sector added globally, and the bulk of it in Europe as well. But we need to remember this is not a direct replacement job from coal to renewables. There is a mismatch, a geographical mismatch. There is a timeline mismatch, and all these very important nuances that need to be considered. So I think my key conclusion or comment on whatever we have heard this morning would be that we really need to also add to everything else this mindset change that will allow us to think holistically about the energy transition, recognize the opportunities that come through this decentralized way of energy supply, see who are the new players that need to be part of it, to recognize these opportunities, and really manage the problems that will come on the way. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and fantastic to have that contribution from you. So thank you very much. Appreciate you giving of your time so generously this morning. And so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And for that, we are now moving on to some of our Slido questions. And my desk resembles, I think, something of the grid system that all of our speakers spoke about, because I have Slido on one screen and I have the CMA app on another screen. So if you see me looking at different screens, I promise I'm paying attention. I'm just trying to get to the first questions, actually, that we might start off with. And Jukka and Albinas, I might come to you first, because I think this question is particularly relevant to yourselves. And Dennis is wondering that how will nations know if a renewables only focus is adequate, or whether we should include low carbon options such as Finland and Lithuania do with nuclear energy. So Albinas, do you want to speak first to Lithuania? And then Jukka, I might ask you to give the Finnish perspective. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that what we see in this green transition is, of course, renewed focus on conventional power generation. And one of the sources of that generation is undoubtedly nuclear. And it is probably not a surprise that we saw some kind of warming up towards nuclear energy. From our own national perspective, we tried a new nuclear project back in 2010. It failed spectacularly when the population voted against that in a referendum. So that was a very good, wake-up call for us. So at the moment, for various reasons, traditional nuclear is excluded for Lithuania. But we see that many new technologies are coming into the market in a smaller scale, new technologies, more flexible application, and that makes nuclear more attractive. And we also see that in the European discussion. there is a shift in the opinion that nuclear will be necessary for our energy transition. So I guess in a very not distant future, we will hear news about renaissance of nuclear energy. At the same time, I have to underline that we have to be extremely strict about nuclear safety, because any major incident or accident in any nuclear installation would halt expansion of nuclear energy very quickly.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Albinas. Jukka, I might ask you to share the Finnish thoughts on this.
Personally, I believe very strongly what was said by Stephanie and also Elizabeth, that first of all, the challenge globally is huge. We need a lot of investments, and it would be wise to use all options. We need also the CCS and CCU for this, and in many countries, nuclear. We already have a lot of nuclear capacity in the world, and it would be not wise to drive it down and try to replace that as well. So that is true. But if you take the Finnish case, for example, there is the market will decide where the companies will invest, and at this stage, by far the most investments go to the onshore wind. And then we have nuclear projects. They are very big. They are very slow. They are not good probably for all countries. In Finland, we have a lot of process industry, as I described. We have a lot of baseload consumption. So electricity is used at least with the effect of 6,000 megawatts, even at the lowest moment in Finland. So if we have a baseload capacity which is clean, like nuclear, it is much easier to build the rest of the system on top of that if you have something like that. But nuclear is not a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet in this game. What we need is a lot of new things in the whole system, and also in the energy use. And what we need is more and more flexibility. But in Finnish case, it's highly useful to have baseload capacity, which is fossil-free.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jukka, for that very comprehensive answer. And the next question is a two-parter. So I might turn to Stephanie and Kevin on these two questions, and I'm going to link them together. So I trust Anonymous will understand my reasons for doing so. But I think two great questions on, firstly, how does the panel propose to get buy-in from industry to achieve a low carbon economy? And related to this question on how to get buy-in from industry, how will we get buy-in from our citizens to achieve a low carbon economy? So Stephanie, I might start with you on that one, if you want to answer whichever aspect of that question you wish, and then Kevin, I'll turn to you then. Stephanie.
Thanks, Noel, and thanks for this great question. Indeed, I mean, the energy transition won't happen because we will have just the policies, but we need to make sure that this is also people-centered transition. So I'll focus more maybe on the buy-in from the consumers and from the people itself. And we clearly need to make sure that we put people at the center of the process of change to make sure that it's an orderly transition. And that's also why at the IEA we have established a global commission for people-centered transition under the Prime Minister of Denmark to clearly explore this issue and to report to the recent COP26. Because as Elizabeth has laid down, there are of course huge opportunities for growth and employment that comes with the rise of new global energy economy, but there's also a possibility of dislocation because many more new green jobs are created, but not necessarily in the same place where jobs are lost, where job skills are lost. So we need to make sure that this happens in a good way, and that we make sure that we include the people. And also another point that I would like to highlight is that right now, we have looked at more the European centric view, given the patents, but we need to make sure that we keep in mind that there are still millions of people that do not have access to electricity today, or that still rely on traditional use of biomass for cooking, with impact on their health, with important impacts on air pollution. So this clean energy transition will also enable to tackle not only climate change, but also other sustainable development goals. So I'm referring more to the Sustainable Development Goal 7, but this is also a way of buying to make sure that we don't, that we can kill one bird with to kill two birds with one stone at the same time. But it's not only about tackling climate change, but tackling also other issues to make sure that we can have the buy-in of the consumers. So maybe I'll stop here to leave some time to Kevin to answer the question as well.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yes, thanks. And Stephanie has given a really good outline there with a more global perspective. I suppose from my perspective, when I hear about people talking about buy-in from industry, well, Statkraft currently is one of the largest providers of renewable power to large industrial consumers across Europe. And to me, that change has already happened. Industry wants to secure green power. We're seeing it in Ireland, where data center operators are specifically going out there trying to source green power to support their data center energy consumption. So in a way, I believe that both from an industry perspective and also from an Irish citizen perspective, I think we're already there. I think we have bought into it, and it's now a case of delivering on the finer details of making it happen, which is no small challenge. But in terms of the attitude of people, and as I referred to there, the EPA survey earlier on, there really is, I think, an understanding from the general public that there needs to be a change, and they want that change. So I'm quite positive towards industry buy-in and the public's buy-in, and it is all now about going to that next step of clear messaging and saying, well, if we want to achieve our targets, then we need to do this. And sometimes it may be unpopular in terms of new infrastructure, whether it be overhead power lines or new renewable projects. But what we found from our engagement with the public is if we go on the ground and explain the need and how this particular initiative is linked with that, then we actually get a really strong support to go ahead and deliver those projects. So for me, I don't think it's the buy-in anymore. I think it's more that we ensure we communicate clearly any initiatives being linked with actually achieving the climate targets.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kevin, on that. And an interesting question from Mary Skara, the Norway's ambassador here in Ireland. And the ambassador is just wondering, how do the renewable energy industries make sure they include and develop talents from the whole population? Is this yet just another male-dominated arena? So great question from Mary. I don't know if Elizabeth is still with us. Okay, this is fantastic. Right, everyone's putting up their hands. Who wants to go first on answer Mary's question?
Well, I guess I'm one of those representatives of renewable energy companies, and I have to say that for me, it's a real it's a real not challenge in terms of attracting talent. We really are seeing a huge amount of interest from people who worked in other sectors going to work wanting to work in the renewable side. In terms of the male-dominated aspect, it's one of the biggest challenges that we have, and a lot of it actually comes from the STEM, the technology and engineering and maths subjects, which are very heavily linked with a lot of the renewable energy companies' activities. They need engineers, they need people with environmental backgrounds and with technical backgrounds. And I think it's really important, and it's an initiative close to my heart in terms of we supported an initiative in University College Cork as an example, where we're encouraging students to go into energy engineering, but particularly female students. And I think a lot of this is actually working at that education level and getting female students interested in the whole area, which I think they generally are, but also supporting and pointing them towards the specific skills that they need to get to be able to join into the industry.
Great, thanks. I think Yuka was next, and then Elizabeth, I'll come to you. So Yuka first. Thank you.
Thanks. No, very, very good points by Kevin, and I support these. But I would say it very shortly. Girls and women, they don't need to change. Our industry needs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Yuka. Elizabeth, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will also be brief. I just want to add a few numbers to this, because we have been tracking this together with the renewable jobs, and what we have observed is that in renewables-based sectors, there are more women working there. There's 32% of the global workforce being female in the renewable sector, compared to 22% in the traditional energy sectors. And I want to make a very important point here. We always talk about STEM, which is absolutely critical and important, but there's so many jobs that they're not STEM. I mean, I'm not an engineer, so there's a lot of other jobs. And the point that Kevin made, that we need to make this more known, more attractive, and also tackle the same barriers that exist in other sectors. We have looked very closely. Why is it that women are not at the same level? And it really is the same barrier like in any other sector. So it's not only about attracting us professionally, but also making sure that the barriers that exist in other sectors are also removed in energy sectors.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And thank you, Ambassador, for that great question. Albinas, I might come to you actually on this question, which has got a lot of likes. So I think it's a very popular question on with a focus on companies and state policy. How big a role can citizen-led community projects play in producing carbon neutral energy? Do you have anything from a Lithuanian perspective that you could share, or any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think what is really important that during this energy transition we do not make huge mistakes, and one of them would be if we create new divides in the society, if we create greater inequality, and if we by some chances create larger energy poverty, for example. So these are concerns that need to be addressed while formulating our policies. Then for us, so-called category of prosumers, consumers that actually produce, but also communities that produce electricity somewhere else, not exactly in their buildings, is extremely important. And it was a part of our policy to create kind of a mob of people who support energy transition. And that's why we very clearly decided that we need to have our own energy community. With, with the deployment of renewables, you already see if I may say, larger democracy in the energy sector, because there are so much more players. But if you also attract a number of prosumers, and in our case, the target is to have 30,000 of them. So in the country with a population of 3 million, this is quite a number. So by that, we also feel that we would encourage, transformation of thinking in the society. And maybe then it will be easier for us also to launch a new project of, for example, onshore wind, where, well, in some instances, we have the resistance of local population. Maybe that would help us also with other new infrastructure projects. So I think it is necessary to allow the society at large play a certain role in the energy policy and energy transition.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Albinus. And we have two questions related to Finland, Jukka. So I'm going to come to you on both of them, if that's okay. And the clock is against us, so I know you'll be very concise and precise in your answer. But the first question is from JP, and they're wondering, how is the increased domestic use of wood burning in Finland for heating and cooking reflected in Finland's overall goal towards being carbon neutral? And then the next question from Finland, I just see one in from Riley Lanalampi, the ambassador of Finland in Dublin. She has commented on how to keep the people engaged so that support for the energy transition is ensured even when it comes to paying for it. And the other Finnish question I had was, yes, on what makes the grids reliable? What was, for example, the key in Finland? And can district heating play a role in making renewable energy more reliable? So I think that's three questions for you there, Jukka.
I think this is a little bit too much at once. You need to repeat some of that. But about the bioenergy, we have a large forest industry in our country. Basically, our country is a forest, and forests are used for many products, especially in pulp and paper. And when there is harvesting, there will be always residues, and there is always sawdust and bark, tree tops, and such for that. And we see that we are using we are only using wood that is cut for other reasons than energy. We are not growing forests as a bioenergy resources. And as we are doing this, we believe that this part of the circular economy, that we are using the parts of the trees that are not good for any commercial other projects for energy, and we have a lot of that. And our forests are growing much more than we are using, and that gives ourselves the opportunity as a country to become carbon neutral by 2035 already, and carbon negative soon after that. And that I believe. And the other questions were. Can you repeat some of that, Noel?
I think you've answered another question that came in on the circular economy. So you're doing fantastic. I think the other one was on wood burning and carbon neutral, and then the other one was on the grid and did district heating play a role in making the Finnish renewable energy grid?
Yes, we have the district heating covers about half of the total heating in Finland of all commercial and residential buildings, and we don't practically have any gas heating in Finland. We have selected either district heating or electrified heating through heat pumps or directly, and that half is district heating. Practically in all municipalities and cities and towns, there is the district heating system. And for decarbonization, we need to change the fuel or the way how we produce the heat. And we are using more and more waste heats, environmental heats from ground or from sea or whatever to produce the heat, so that we don't need to burn that much anymore. But as I told, we use bio residues for heating as well. That gives us a huge resource also to combine that with the electricity system. When we get more and more wind from time to time, the price of electricity goes very low, much lower than the price of the fuel that we are using in district heating systems. And then in future, we can use electricity for district heating whenever it is cheaper than the fuel. And when we have lack of wind, we again start burning something or doing something else. The district heating systems also have the opportunity of taking the waste heat, even from the block of flats or big malls or whatever, for the system, and generate warm water, for example, for the whole system. So this is an excellent way. Now, of course, it was developed for a different purpose, just to heat the homes centrally in cold country. But nowadays we have a great opportunity to use it by as some kind of a platform for energy in the cities.
Thank you, Jukka. And with your permission from the panel and the audience's indulgence, because I've so many questions coming in, I'll just try and go another 5 minutes. So if I may, I might turn to Stephanie Albinas, and maybe Kevin, you might want to come in on this. How can Ireland learn from the Nordics and Baltics in this area, and what can the Nordic and Baltics learn from Ireland? So Stephanie, maybe do you want to give your larger perspective on that comment, and then I might ask Albinas and Kevin to come in on that.
Sure, thanks. Maybe I'll take the question, as you said, with the global perspective, more like what can other countries can learn from the Nordics, given the biggest expansion that we have seen in terms of renewables, especially in the Nordics, but also other important improvements that we have seen also regarding district heating. And this is also a key area that we see for other advanced economies. I think there are good lessons to learn from the Nordics when it comes to renewables expansion, and that could be replicated to other countries, but also taking into account the national circumstances that we have there, because as it was said before, we need all technologies to make sure that we achieve this clean energy transition, but it's not one size fits for all solution. I mean, we cannot replicate exactly the same solution that we have seen in the Nordics to all the other countries. We need to use the lessons that we have learned from other countries to make sure that we can replicate those in other regions, but keeping in mind that we have different national circumstances and that we cannot replicate everything from one country to another.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Albinas, did you want to come in on that?
Well, it's very difficult to advise other country. You know, we all make our mistakes. We all achieve something. I think what is important is to share our experiences, and this we are doing also in this format. I think one of the greatest lessons that we have learned is to have as much as possible interconnections with your neighboring markets. Second thing, it is important to allow markets send proper signals what to do with the investment in the infrastructure and also in the generation. And third thing, which is also very important, is to be ambitious. I think it is necessary to set up targets that are really challenging, and then those targets also, with the help of different instruments that are coming from the European Union, with the European legislation, that in turn allows us to transit to this green economy more smoothly.
Great. Thank you, Albinas. And Kevin, I think you'd have a particularly interesting perspective on this, perhaps wearing your two hats. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's really interesting. And you know, I guess maybe sometimes we're a little bit inclined when we're in a country to kind of feel that the grass is greener in another country and, oh, the Nordics are great and they do things really well and we don't do things as well in Ireland. But what I'm seeing across the entire region is that, as Stephanie outlined, each country is different in terms of its resources, capabilities, and what it needs to do. But what I would say that Ireland could learn from the Nordic countries that I'm working in is that use the tools you have to the maximum extent. So if I look at a country like Norway, obviously this happened a long time ago, but they have used their hydro resource to produce pretty much all of their power. And they've used that then to grow heavy industry. Similar with Finland, they've used the resources they had to grow that. But actually, from an Irish perspective, I think we should be really positive in terms of how we've used our onshore wind resource. We have almost 40% of our electricity today coming from onshore wind, and we have up to 75% of our power coming on any individual moment from onshore wind. So I think each country needs to use the resources it has and really push with an ambitious target to make use of them and deliver on them. So I think there's a learning there in terms of how the Baltic and Nordic states have used the resources they have to the very maximum. And in Ireland, I think we're already going in that right direction with our onshore wind resource. And now I think our offshore wind resource in particular gives us a real prospect to achieve something really significant.
Fantastic. Well, on that optimistic note and that call to action, which is fantastic, always a positive note to end proceedings at, I'm very sorry to say that we must conclude today's webinar. Thank you so much. We've gone a little bit over, but I think it was worth it. And my apologies to everyone on Slido that we didn't get to all the fantastic questions, notwithstanding Yuka managing to answer 4 questions in one go. So very impressed. So, but if I can, on behalf of all of us watching today's event, can I really thank and pay tribute our very distinguished and expert panel this morning for not only providing us with their valuable time, their opinions, their thoughts and their insights, but such a great and wide-ranging conversation and panel Q&A and debate. So very many thanks to Minister Thomas Byrne, to Yuka, Kevin, to Albinas and to Stephanie and to Elizabeth for such an insightful discussion. So thank you all very much. And a couple of other thank yous, if I may. Particular thanks again to Riley, Ambassador of Finland to Ireland and her colleagues, but also all the Nordic Baltic ambassadors here who have been instrumental in the driving force in putting together such an excellent panel on today's important issue. That Nordic Baltic Irish collaboration was very much put into effect and into force to make today's webinar possible. So a big thank you to all of them, with a special honourable mention to Riley. And if I may as well, it does take a village, or it does take a community to create a webinar such as this. And particular thanks and credit must also go to our excellent and hardworking colleagues in the Department of Foreign Affairs. And if I may pay particular tribute to Olive Hempelstall and her colleagues Chris and Gareth, who have been behind the scenes working furiously to put together this excellent webinar, and technologically to put together this excellent webinar, which is no mean feat in these times. So particular thanks to them. And if I may thank my own colleagues in European Movement Ireland, we've been delighted to be involved in this event, and I want to thank them for their support. And thank you, the audience. I appreciate everyone has busy schedules, so your questions and your comments and your contributions were fantastic. Please do continue to follow and engage with this conversation. And with that, all I can say to everyone is wishing you all a very joyful, a very happy and peaceful Christmas, and every success and good luck for a brighter 2022 and whatever it may bring. Hopefully, perhaps the next NB8 Ireland conference, we might all be in person at some stage. But in the meantime, slán go fóill, goodbye everyone, stay